But we just got to hold off from darkening the highlights too much, because they are what we need to retain to give it that 3D effect, but also the iridescence. Hi, I'm Anna Mason. Welcome to this episode of Nature Studio TV, the place to be to create a nature-connected creative life. In this mini class, I'm going to show you how to paint the iridescent effects to this section of unopened petal from this beautiful bearded iris called Sable Night, which I painted a few years ago at a larger than life size. Let's take a look. I'm going to make a drawing. So I've outlined the box because we're just doing this section, and I've used a waterproof pen to do that. And then for the drawing, I just want to mark out these most prominent veins. I'm just going to do it by eye. So it's this curving because it's this unopened petal. So I'm just kind of focusing on that one main vein here, comes down, got a line above it, comes almost to the top. And then coming out from here, we've got another one, and there's a kink to it. And can't really see the base of that because it goes into the dark, but there's like another kinked line that comes along here. And just to show myself what's what, I'm just going to shade that in because that's a really dark bit. And then there's kind of a line coming down here from that, but then we've got another vein that sort of peters out here, and another one like that. And there's another one here. I've probably got my spacing a bit wrong because that's a bit low down, but for the purposes of this demo, that doesn't matter. I'm just going to shade that bit there. And then this is kind of all dark, so I'm just going to sort of mark in the edge. It's not a smooth edge, so I'm just marking a jaggedy line, but just to show me where this dark colour really comes to. Okay, and this is all dark up here, but that should be more obvious when I'm painting. So we'll start with the lightest colours, and that's this sort of shimmering metallic kind of colours we've got over in the highlights on this side. And we've got a kind of greenish colour to them down here, and then it transitions into a more purple one. But there's little flecks of the green in here, there's little flecks of the purple. So that's really the nature of the iridescent quality, is little tiny flecks of colour, little dots of colour, which sort of represent the little crinkles. If you imagine the actual physical texture of that petal, it's crinkled, and that's why we've got some bits more reflective than others. So let's create a mix. I'm going to use, for the green, a little bit of permanent sap green and a little bit of Winsor lemon. But it's got to be so dilute, and that's too bright, so I want to make that a more muted colour, and I'm going to use for this some Davies grey. Now I hardly use Davies grey, mainly because I'm conscious that kind of lots of people wouldn't necessarily have it in their palette, but it's great for this kind of thing where you want to stay super light. If you don't have it, you can create a variation or a version of it by using Payne's grey and burnt sienna. Okay, that bit of burnt sienna had some red in from before, but you just have to have it even more dilute, so you completely can do that. But in this instance, I just wanted to use the Davies grey just to minimise that colour mixing. So then I've got something really pale still, and I'm going to apply that quite liberally down into this area. Actually, I feel like those very bright colours have more of the Winsor lemon in, so I'm just going to try and reflect that. And then coming up here, just underneath that, it start to go into the more purple colours, but there's a little bit of green up here. So let's get the purple light colour, and again I'm going to use, well, let's mix the purple. It's got some quinacridone violet as the base, but then I want to make it a bit more pink. I'm actually going to use some permanent rose. You could use a tiny bit of the opera rose. And that seems about right. It's quite bright for some areas, but well, let's mute it down a bit with some more of that Davies grey. It's a little bit less bright, and then I'm going to pop that kind of up here into these highlight areas. I'm just going over these areas that are also going to be darker. I can go a bit into those because there is the occasional kind of fleck into these lighter colours, so I'd rather apply this lighter colour into more places than we might need it. And I'll pop it there. That's going to be much darker, that's all going to be much darker, but even within that there's the occasional fleck of a lighter colour, so let's just pop this down so that there's actually kind of a layer everywhere. And then If we were working on the whole flower, you could easily just work into another part of it now, and that would naturally dry off as you were working elsewhere. But I'm going to dry this right off with a hairdryer now for speed. Okay, so I had been using my one brush because I was working on a bigger area. I'm going to go down to the 0 now, and I'm going to create the darkest mix that I've got there. So I'm going to use a base of the quinacridone violet, but it's too bright. I'm going to add to it some burnt sienna and a bit of Payne's grey. Just popping that on the palette and taking from there because it's so strong. And that seems about right. If it needs more, if it feels like it needs to be a little bit more red, then try some of the burnt sienna. So I've got that nice and thick, creamy to milky to creamy consistency. And then I'm going to apply that up here and just stipple a bit and leave a few gaps through to the lighter colour, which we'll need to darken up. And just feathering that transition there. And then using this to start to mark in these veins, but just paying attention to these lines. There's a darker bit there, darker patch here. This is all dark up here. As I'm painting, it feels like it needs to be a little bit more pink, but I think that's the little flecks through, so I think we can achieve that with a layer on top. Although coming into this vein, I'm just going to add a little bit more of the burnt sienna into the mixture there, so it feels a little bit more brown. And then filling that bit in there. Maybe that's too brown. Pop in some more of the Payne's grey. And then coming along here nice and thin, darker there. So just really trying to recreate these markings that I can see. Doesn't matter if they're not in quite the right places. We're giving the general impression of this kind of texture. So we've got the darks in place, we've got, I'm just going to pop a little bit more there as I see, and we've got those lights. So now we need to bridge the gap, and in so doing we're going to start to add the iridescent kind of look. So I'm going to go right the way down to a treble 0 because we need to get quite a lot of texture into this. And I want to create a mix that's that mid-tone colour. So I'm going to use my Davies grey as a bit of a base. It just feels like that's a good one for this. I'm going to add some of that mixture that I've just been using into it and use it nice and thick, which is what's lovely about the Davies grey, because it's such a light paint. For something like this you can use it nice and thick, which actually allows us to make more kind of visual texture than if we have to have the paint more watery. We can't capture as much of that, and it's this little flecks and these little dot markings that's going to give us the iridescence. So you can see I'm just applying it around here. This is darker. I'm going to just stipple a bit into here. I'm just leaving off of that bit there that's got the green more visible. This is all a bit lighter, so I'm holding off of there, but coming down here and filling in here. Just watering it down a bit because it's drying off quickly. Now actually I want to have a bit more green to it, so I'm going to pop a bit of this in, although that may not be enough. So let's just get a little bit of the permanent sap green, pop a little bit of that in there, and a bit of the Windsor lemon. Too much, so I'll just balance that out with some more Davies grey. Let's try that. Yeah, that feels like a better match. As we've come down, there's more of this green as we're sort of entering into that area that had the more green highlights. So again, stippling here, leaving a few little gaps through to the lighter colour. That's how we start to get the iridescent look. And trying to pay attention to not go into that highlight. I went into a little bit there, but that's okay. This bit's all darker, but with some few little gaps through. And then got another little highlight here that I want to leave best I can. And then block all of this in. Over here, this bit is sort of a real mix match of lots of different hues, and they're all flecked, so I'm just going to dot that one in there. And while I'm here, I'm going to go back to this colour, but just perhaps a little bit more watery, so it's a bit lighter, and just fleck a bit into that. That Davies grey, because it's thick, it dries nice and quickly, so you want to make sure that's pretty dry before you work into it, otherwise it will bleed, but it's drying, as I say, nicely because it's so thick. So just adding a bit more detail there. So we're stepping back to get some of that iridescence. We now just need to work on the slightly sort of lighter mid-tones. So I'm just going to get that green grey mix and water it down a touch and just pop it over here and fleck it a few little dots into that lighter bit. And see, that bit needs the more purple mixture, and I'm going to add a bit more grey to it. So that was the basically quinacridone violet with quite a lot of burnt sienna and some Payne's grey, but now I'm adding some Davies grey to it to get a kind of mid-tone version of that. And in here there's a section that's darker, and then again we've got little flecks going into that lighter highlight. And we can just layer up. Do we need to darken over here? Yes, this could be darker, so I'm going to use this mix to do that. I'm going to have I'm going to use some of that permanent rose to have a slightly more pink version of this brown mix, and I'm going to layer that on top here to just lift that colour a touch, and that can actually potentially go onto that vein a little bit, because as we're darkening up the midtones I can see these veins are going to need to be darkened up in quite a few places. So really now we're into tonal juggling, so I can see that along that line, that transition between this dark patch and over here on the highlights, I need to be darker. So I'll go back to the grey-green mixture, particularly for down the bottom, and just darken up so I get those contrast levels right between the highlights. And you can see it starts to have that feeling of being curved over. We just got to hold off from darkening the highlights too much, because they are what we need to retain to give it that 3D effect, but also the iridescence. So I'm just stippling as I go here on the edge there as well, trying to recreate that visual texture. So pretty much anywhere where you see that iridescence in a plant, or might even be on an animal's skin, it's going to be all about capturing little dots of texture, little bits of high contrast basically between darks and lights to give it a sort of shimmering kind of a look. So that's starting to feel quite good. I'm going to have that more grey purple mixture. Darken up in here again, and a bit more of this, and then I can see, you know, these darkest tone areas are really jumping out as needing darkening some more. So much detail in just a tiny little section, and this is what realism is all about. And it's one of the reasons why I love to paint larger, because you can really go all in on this detail. The bigger you work, the more detail you can capture. So back to my dark mix with the quinacridone violet, burnt sienna, Payne's grey, and just darkening up. That's dried now, so I could just add another layer on, get the contrast levels looking right, picking out the very darkest bits. A few really dark flecks over here. And so then it's just the tonal juggling kind of back and forth. I'm just looking for some darker mid-tone areas to bring those back in balance now. I've darkened up the darkest tones some more. It's in here a little bit, a few flecks there. Back to my dark mix, darken that up. We could keep going, but I think as a demo to show this technique and to show the sort of little flecks of detail that you need to be capturing, I hope that that gives you a clear idea of how to do it. I hope practicing making this visual texture is fun for you and makes you feel more confident to tackle this sort of look as you see it in your nature subjects going forward. A solo tutorial of this full iris with a traceable line drawing and videos covering several key sections is available now with Nature Studio membership. Members have been getting beautiful results. If you've enjoyed this mini class, please subscribe to Nature Studio TV, then pop over to naturestudio.com where you can sign up for a free class and find a whole heap of resources to help you experience the joy of capturing nature's beauty on your paper. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.